Joining me today is Bella DePaulo, PhD. Her new book is Single at Heart: The Power, Freedom, and Heart-Filling Joy of Single Life. What does it really mean to choose the single life on purpose? Drawing on research from more than 20,000 people, Bella DePaulo, PhD, explains why many who are single at heart experience deep fulfillment, joy, and psychological richness outside romantic partnerships. She shares evidence that some singles grow happier with age and may even navigate aging more successfully than those whose lives center on marriage. She also explores the stereotypes aimed at single people and why society's obsession with loneliness often overlooks the profound rewards of solitude and the resilience of those who intentionally choose single life. She's written the column Living Single for Psychology Today since 2008 and has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine. She's also been interviewed on the Today Show, CNN, American Morning, CBS This Morning, Good Morning America, CBS Sunday Morning, and Anderson Cooper 360. Welcome to the show, Dr. DePaulo.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Okay, single at heart. I guess the first thing I should ask you is what's the definition of single at heart? What are we talking about?
Well, people who are single at heart, for us, single life is our best life, our most meaningful, fulfilling, and psychologically rich life. We are happy and flourishing because we are single, not in spite of it.
You're happy because you are single, and yet it seems to me that generally, and maybe things are getting better, culturally, society, people make these assumptions that you are not happy, that you are lonely. And where does that come from? Why do we do that?
Right. Uh, at one point it may have been more true. So, for example, in the 1950s, just about everyone got married, whether they wanted to or not, whether they were gay or straight or anything else. It's just what people did, and hardly anyone got divorced. And so, if you were single then, you might have felt more likely to be lonely or unhappy. And now, as there are more and more people who are staying single, and we have more awareness of what it can be like and more resistance to the stereotypes, I don't think we single people accept that as much anymore. It's still there, it's still that pressure, and it's still like there's this defensiveness we're pushed into that married people aren't. So I might get asked, so why are you still single? Why? Whereas a married person won't be asked, why are you still married? How did you miss the divorce train?
But there are also, and I think obviously you mentioned this in the book too, we're talking about maybe two different things. I mean, there's the legalities, and I think that's really
Oh,
important. There
right.
haven't, as particularly, I would say, for women who weren't, the legal system didn't support being single. You were kind of in a bind in that way if you wanted to be able to, well, get a job. You're talking about,
Huh?
20, 30, 40 years ago,
Yes.
not possible, or be a professional, all those kinds of things. So that kind of,
Right.
right? And then there's the emotional, social side of it too, because those are,
Correct.
yeah, two different angles.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the official legal marriage is important because all sorts of benefits and protections follow from that, which is why one of the reasons why people who advocated for same-sex marriage work so hard to get it. And one of the things to keep in mind is that even though there is progress like you described, single people are still legally cut off from many of the protections and benefits that legally married people get. In everyday life, it's socially single that matters. Do you have a romantic partner? Are you seen as part of a couple? And that matters because you get treated differently if you are. You're more likely to be, even now, you're more likely to be pitied if you don't have a romantic partner. You're more likely to get excluded from various social events. So all of that matters.
All of that does matter. And but I'm also thinking in reading your book, it's isn't such a dichotomy anymore. There are so many different options for being single at heart or married or partnered,
Right.
half living
Yes.
together. I sort of fall, I think, into the middle road. So,
Yeah.
but you have to take advantage of those options, obviously, or be able to do that. So, that the new, it's a little more nuanced than it used to
It,
be.
yes, it really is. As people come up with more ways of living their lives that are not so restricted. So, one example is living apart together, where committed couples have places of their own, not because they want to cheat, but because they thrive in solitude and miss each other more and appreciate each other more when they're together if they're not together all the time.
So you might get the best of both in that situation. You can be together when you want
Correct.
to and not when you don't want to, and you can be monogamous if you want to, or you don't have
Mhm.
to be monogamous if you don't want to. Uh,
Right.
I think there's less judgment on
Hmm.
the part of I do. I mean,
Right. Yeah, that has gotten better. And in
how
fact,
can we?
there's
Yeah, go ahead.
some some people have described our moment as a moment of singles positivity. And there is some of that where some of us, myself included, are trying to underscore the great benefits and potential strengths of being single. And that's a whole different um, narrative than the one that says, oh, if you're single, you poor thing, you're deficient and you're lesser than.
So let's talk about those because that's true. I don't think that the positivity, all of the advantages, I should say,
Mhm.
the good stuff
Mhm.
is
Right,
not really talked about. That's true. Um,
right,
and assumptions are made that if you're single, very often that you're miserable. Although less and
right.
less so. I know a lot of married people who say, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm done.
yeah,
I do not want to be married. And
yeah,
I think you also talk about that, whether widowed or,
yeah.
divorced. Yeah. So let's talk about the advantages, the good stuff.
About being
Being
single?
single. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I'll especially talk about it for the single at heart. So there are
Okay.
so many things we love about being single. Three of the big ones are our freedom, our solitude, and our people. So freedom is a really big one. We get to be the captains of our own ship. We get to decide the little decisions of everyday life, like how warm or cold to keep our place, when to eat, when to sleep, how to spend or save our money. We get to decide how we want to live, where we want to live, and the big decisions of of life, like moving from one coast to the other, as I did, or completely changing your work life. So that's freedom. That's a big one. Um, the time we have to ourselves, our solitude. People who are single at heart appreciate that. We're not afraid of being alone. And so that means we are especially unlikely to be lonely. And as much as we appreciate having time to ourselves, we also like our people. And whereas we don't have what committed couples have, or we usually don't, which is the one, we often have the ones. So we, on average, have more friends, we tend to them more, and we get to spend as much time being with them, caring for them, and for as many of them as we want to, without some partner thinking that time and attention belongs to them.
And I think you also don't spend so much time negotiating and compromising with another partner that you are yes,
R-
constant with.
Right, right. I mean, we all compromise
Yeah,
regardless of our
yeah.
relationship status, but yeah, there's not a partner there. And so, for example, when I wanted to move from um, Virginia, where I was a professor at the University of Virginia, out here to Santa Barbara, California, was a huge thing because my family was there, my friends, my job, my house. And it was a big financial risk because I didn't have a regular job at the time. But I just loved it out here in California so much that I was willing to take that risk. And I think it would have been different if I had to worry about a partner who might not be so enamored of that
Yeah.
idea.
Do you think also, taking that risk to move someplace where
Yeah.
taking up your roots,
Yeah.
do you think that maybe risk taking generalizes to other choices in a positive way?
Yeah. And in fact, that's kind of what we mean by psychological richness, that you have a diversity of interesting and different perspectives and experiences.
Now, I know one of the issues you address is the future, because
Mhm.
we, um, will be concerned about when I get old, who's going to take care of me if I'm not partnered with somebody or married to somebody, if I get sick, if, all the
Yeah.
stuff that happens to all of us, the
Yeah.
disasters. Then what am I going to do?
Yeah. Um, and that was one of the most heartening things I've discovered as I've studied single life, especially the single at heart, is that there are so many ways in which those of us who are single, especially if we're single at heart and we've invested in our single lives, are actually doing especially well as we grow older. So there are several studies that show that as single people sail past midlife and into later life, they just get happier and happier. And there are lots of reasons for that. One is what I already mentioned, that we who are single at heart appreciate and savor our solitude. So we are unlikely to be lonely and to become the caricature of the old single person who's all sad and lonely and isolated. And another reason we aren't is that we tend to our friends and the other important people in our life. Research shows that people who get married or become committed to another romantic partner tend to become more insular. They spend less time with their friends, they call their parents less often. It's basically the two of them in their world. And not every person who's coupled does that, but on average, it does happen. And that can be fine while your relationship or your marriage is going well. But then if it ends by a breakup or divorce or widowhood, now you don't have that social network that people who have stayed single have, because they didn't put a romantic partner on a pedestal and demote everyone else.
So in other words, you really, as if you do that and you are just
Yeah.
committed to one person, you're saying maybe as all these things will or may happen to you, you've
Yeah.
kind of eliminated the whole support system, that because you haven't nurtured those
Right.
relationships. Yeah. So when
Yeah.
when let's say your spouse dies, there's nobody
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's at divorce or widowhood when you're most vulnerable and need people there for you. And yet maybe you didn't treat them that great when you got married and decided they weren't that important anymore.
What do you do? Because you talk about this too, because like the gay community, women's groups, Me Too, all
Hmm.
of those have kind of banded together and demanded their
Hmm.
rights, or demanded a
Yes.
different way of existing in our culture. But single
Right.
people have not done that.
We're starting. Other countries are better at it than we are, but we're starting here. There's an organization called Singles Equality, and they have put out just recently a Singles Bill of Rights that goes through all the different ways in which single people are not treated fairly, but should be. And this this is an important moment, I think, because you have the singles positivity movement, you've got more people staying single, and you have more people in academia studying single life, and more people seeing it in a more complex complex way than just, oh, you poor thing, you're single.
Yeah, and also people are living longer, single or
Yes,
otherwise. So you have a
right,
huge population of people who are going to live to 90 years old, single.
right. And um, more and more of them are not remarrying by choice. Well, especially women. There's a
Yes.
big difference there between men and women.
And we do
And
understand that. Yeah, go on.
yeah, right. And people say, oh, well, there's fewer men available to them. And that's true. But when you talk to them, it's not just about that. Even if there were men or women, if their romantic partners would be women, even if they were available, they don't want that. They want their autonomy, their people, their solitude. And so that's a big difference too.
What about I mean, because the cultures cross-culturally, it's different in Western
Yes.
societies. I'm making the assumption
Yes.
when you talk about that too, but whether
Mhm.
you're in Africa or whether you're in
Right.
South America or here, it seems to me there are a lot more opportunities. There's a lot more power in
Yes.
right in being able to.
Right. Yeah. So that varies tremendously. And also the pressures in some cultures, there's much more pressure to be married and live a traditional life. It might be harder to live on your own in some cultures. And yet, the reverse is true too, that
Yeah.
some places are much more open to different ways of living. So, for example, in Scandinavian countries, the percentage of people who live alone is a lot higher than it is here.
I mean, I have several Dutch friends, and
Mhm.
for Americans, we come from that puritanical, ethical, moral, whatever, and so that I
Yeah, yeah,
impacts the way we feel about each other. But most of them are not married. I mean, they have
yeah,
families and kids, but they do not get married.
yeah.
That's
So
a
that's a,
difference.
yeah, that's a
Yeah,
difference too.
yeah, because some of that has to do with, I think, as we talked about earlier, it has to do with benefits and financial
Yes.
stuff. It works
No
better
one,
not being married. Yeah.
right, yeah. But one thing that is true just about everywhere all around the world is that more and more people are staying single, and the age at which people get married, if they do get married, has been going up in many countries all around the world.
I think another thing that I'm noticing, a lot of younger people have, well, they partner, but they don't get married. They have kids.
Right,
But yeah,
right,
that's a
right.
trend that I'm seeing, which is, well, where does that
Yeah,
go?
I think in the big picture, everything we've been discussing falls under the category of we are more empowered to choose the life that suits us, to live authentically rather than following one path that's elevated or valued above all the others. Now, some people find that threatening. And I think that's a big reason why we get so much of the Heritage Foundation pushback, trying to get women back in to be barefoot and pregnant.
Yeah.
But,
Why are
yeah.
they doing that?
Yeah, it's threatening to have women not stay in their place and want, good jobs and freedom and solitude and friends instead of putting a man at the center of their life, or worse still, a woman, right? By their standards.
But the advantages in the culture where women are working and productive,
Yeah.
um, are very different than in those countries where they're not, where you're
Yes.
not taking advantage in a good way of. half the population or 50% of the population,
Sure,
right?
sure. And even over time, in the US, it made a huge difference when women were able to more routinely support themselves and maybe even some kids, as opposed to when they were tethered to a spouse for economic life support.
Now, what's the difference? And you talk about this between the attitude towards men who remain single and women are single at heart, and women who remain single at heart, the societal attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when I ask people about that, what they think, they'll almost always say it's worse for women. They're called spinsters and leftovers, and there's a different derogatory word in just about every culture, and that men are more welcome to, let's say, dinner parties than a single woman, and they can go on and on like that. And yet, single men also get it too, especially now. They're stereotyped as incels, as if they're all the same, or mama's boys in the basement with orange fingers from eating junk food in front of their computers. And
In their
and
Barker lounge.
yeah, yeah. And that's just so unfair to the single men who are thriving as singles. And that included many men that who shared their life stories with me for my Single at Heart book.
Let's talk about some of those men because, I often, and this, I don't have the statistics, but that men, if they're divorced, let's say
Mhm.
middle-aged or they are become widowed, that they usually want to get married and do
Mhm.
so more so than women.
Yes,
Once that happens, okay,
yes.
I'm done. I'm single and I'm single at heart and that's it. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so there's a
Yes,
difference.
there are big differences. And on average, men do want to remarry more than women do, and they do. But not all single men are the same, just like not all single women are. And some single men really are single at heart, and they don't do the stereotypical thing of being, the man who wants to be the strong man and fulfill all those stereotypes. Instead, they have full lives with friends and interests and passions and an appreciation of solitude as well.
When you, or as you decided to be, or you are single at
Yes.
heart, what about your friends, your family? Was there
Yeah.
any, or is there any pushback?
Um, for the longest time, my whole life, I thought my mother was fine with me being single. She never pressured me, not even subtly. And we did some traveling together, and she knew that I had friends. She had met lots of them. She knew I had a job that I loved. And so I was kind of proud of myself for that. I have a mom who doesn't fuck me. And of course, my father didn't either. But then, in my very last conversation alone with her, as she lay dying, she brought up my single life for the first time. And she said, I worry about you. And it absolutely broke my heart because I thought she knew that I was thriving because I was single. And when I was writing Single at Heart, wow, that story just stayed with me. I want other parents to understand that if they have single kids who don't seem obsessed with dating or don't seem unhappy about their lives, and in fact seem pretty content about it, don't worry about them. What you should worry about is if got they organized their life around a romantic partner because they thought they should. And if they live inauthentically, according to somebody else's life script or wishes or interests, that's the risk to your health and well-being, not living according to other people's expectations or desires.
Well, as you're saying, authenticity is really,
Yes,
that's, one has to live an
right.
authentic life. But then
Yeah.
I think if for each one of us, your mother, she lived her authentic life different than yours. And, so there's
Yes.
always, I think, as a parent, maybe I
Yes.
could speak,
Yeah.
there's that nagging little part that really didn't color your whole relationship with your kids, but maybe that's a little bit of the truth or her truth.
Yeah.
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 We only have a couple minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah, this was great. I'm talking to Dr. Bella DePaulo, and her book is Single at Heart, the Power, Freedom, and Heart-Filling Joy of Single Life. Great book. So Dr. DePaulo, give us websites,
Okay.
platforms to go to. Yeah,
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to do that. So my website is belladepaulo.com. And so you don't need to remember how to spell that or anything else. Just Google single at heart and my website will come up. You can also find the book at the usual online places and hopefully in all your local stores and libraries. And if you go there and it's not there, tell them to order it because people want to read it.
fantastic. And also just give us that other website you mentioned earlier
All
in the
right,
interview. Yeah,
singlesequality.org.
yeah,
Yes, go to that and look up the Singles Bill of Rights.
great. Thanks so much for being on the show today. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. It was great. Yeah,
Thank you. I really
thank
enjoyed
you.
talking to you.
Joining me today is Beth Krashevsky. Her new book is Stronger Than You Know. Stronger Than You Know, Empowering Financial and Life Decisions for Women Facing Divorce, and in parentheses, especially in high assets, high stakes divorces. Divorce isn't just the division of assets, it's the unraveling of a shared life and the decisions made in the process that can shape a woman's future for decades. Seasoned divorce expert Beth Krashevsky shares that shares the 10 critical minefields women must avoid, from entering negotiations without a post-divorce plan to overlooking tax consequences or assuming a 50-50 split guarantees fairness. She explains how to build the right legal and financial team, how to understand what truly qualifies as a marital asset, and how to use the marital balance sheet as a strategic tool. She also offers guidance on staying grounded during conflict and navigating a toxic or controlling ex-spouse. She maintains that when women align financial choices with long-term goals, they reclaim clarity, confidence, and power. She's had multiple appearances on Forbes Women Wealth Advisors Best in State list, honors from Working Mother magazine, and has received the Raymond James Woman of Distinction Award. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, Beth.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Kathryn.
Well, there's so much to talk about in all of this, and so many people are getting divorced. And first, maybe your credentials, which I described at the end, are your accolades, but first tell us or define what you are. You're not an accountant, you're not a lawyer, not a therapist. We need that dream team, as you say in your book. What's your role?
Yeah, thanks for asking because I think it is somewhat of a unique role. So I've been a financial planner, so a certified financial planner for I think it's over 20 years now. But then I am also a certified divorce financial analyst. So there's quite a few hundreds of us throughout the country. So our role in divorce is to really focus in on the financial matters of the divorce that really have such a tremendous impact on a person's future looking forward after divorce.
As you say in the book, I think unfortunately, women, and I guess this is still true. I didn't really think it was true, but you are the expert and you say it is, that women are not really engaged in financial matters in their marriage. Mostly men handle the big stuff, the important stuff. So when you get divorced, many women have no idea what's been going on financially in their marriages, right? I'm thinking of that book, Amanda Burden. She's probably a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start from there. What do you need to know? Uh,
Yeah. And I think, first of all, to go to the comment on women's, I agree with you, Kathryn, that women are becoming more empowered financially in marriages. What I see also, because I haven't always only worked with people going through divorce, I work with couples, and it typically what happens in a marriage is one spouse is the financial decision maker. I do think that it's, historically, it has been the man who has been running the finances. We're seeing some changes to that, but usually there is one less financially empowered spouse in a marriage. Um, so go to your question of what do you need to know. So in this really this applies to whether you were that financially empowered spouse or you weren't, because the need to know the finances even better when going into divorce, because now that the stakes are higher, things are going to be divided. So it starts with the basics of knowing what you have. So what do you own? What assets do you have? What do you owe people? Those are the debts. How much are you spending? What's the income in the household? And then when we start to really get at the more complicated marital estate, it's understanding tax ramifications of different assets, liquidity. That means, like, how fast can someone get to their money? So cash would be really liquid, whereas a home is much less liquid. Really starting to understand the more of the mechanics of the assets can really have a big impact on being able to have a financial life that is aligned and meeting your goals after divorce.
Right. So you need to know all that stuff, but you're going through a divorce. How do you know, or how do you find out if one spouse or the other is hiding their assets?
Yeah. So when hiding assets comes up quite a bit in the divorces that we work on, not to say that it always is going on, but people are usually a little bit suspicious. My first thing that I always say, and I've talked to many divorce attorneys about this, and they tend to feel the same way, is that typically someone's into a woman's intuition about this is usually correct. So sometimes I have people come in and say, I know that he's been hiding a lot of money. There's stuff that's going on, right? There's offshore companies and accounts, and there's things that are, and I have other people that come in that they say, you know what, it's not happening. There's money that's not, it's not, there's no hidden assets here. And usually their intuition is correct. However, many people come in this sort of gray area where they say, I don't know, I don't want to think this about my spouse, but there's been a few of these little things that make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So the intuition is a good place to start. And then we can start by looking at things. My first check on it is looking at the total assets that the couple has compared to where their income has been. And I just say, does this make sense, right? Like for a household that's had X amount of income, just after looking at these for so many years, I can have a pretty good gut check to say, okay, the assets that are being disclosed are within the ballpark or not within the ballpark that I think they are. And then there's all different levels of forensic work that can be done of looking at accounts, looking at statements, so detailed financial transactions to really get a better sense of if money has been hidden.
And another thing you talk about is like your attitude towards money. And I think you gave an example of a couple of two women, I guess, one who, was worth $20 million and was afraid to buy a new couch, if when, and
Right.
another one who's worth $200,000, who's taking trips. I can't exactly remember what she was doing, but had no difficulty being, taking trips or doing whatever she wanted to do, even though she didn't necessarily have the financial backing for it.
So money is powerful, and I say it carries energy to it. And there's a lot that has built that energy. So typically our experiences growing up have significantly impacted how we see money. So there's some people that they are completely fueled by saving every penny that they can and seeing their money grow, whereas other people are fueled by giving their money away. Other people are fueled on spending money to make other people feel happy. So there's a lot of complexity that goes in with the emotional dynamic of with money. And I think, again, as I had mentioned earlier, I had said somewhat earlier that it divorce brings a time where it's even more important to reflect and understand what someone's relationship is with money, because it can help them make the decisions that are best aligned with where they are currently at with their relationship with money. Maybe identify if there's some places that their current relationship with money isn't serving them, and to be able to thoughtfully work through that. In order, I use this word alignment a lot, to have alignment with money through the divorce and after the divorce process.
And I think another part of that with you also discuss is the fact that people, when going through a divorce, obviously the emotions are high, et cetera, but people think in terms of now, what do I need now? And get stuck in the now and not think about, I think you said, well, what do you want? Where do you want to be 2, 3 years from now? What are your financially, what are your aspirations, all those kinds of things. And I think you're so right that maybe particularly women, they tend to get stuck. This is what I need now.
Yeah. And you know what's so interesting is sometimes I find that with everything that's going on through divorce, right? There's the emotional side to it. People are entering into a legal situation they've never been in before, and there's a different language that's being used. And then there's the financial transaction. So even women who have been leading companies and women who have been leading families can find themselves just sort of struggling in that. And so I find that it's sometimes even hard for women to articulate, what do I need now? That it's such a disorienting experience. And so, I think that that is the next place, especially, the day after divorce. They're saying, okay, how do I pay the bills today? That's a big question or thought that comes up. But as you started to mention, I feel we do something that's pretty not usually done in the divorce process. And we start to think forward of asking our clients, what do you want life to look like in 3 years? What's the most important for you? And even if it's I find again that it's really hard for people to have a lot of clarity about that. But even if there's a few just North Stars, like I had a client that her main thing is that she wanted to be able to move with her big, beautiful dog to either be living close to her daughter or her son post divorce. And that was the North Star, that sort of vision out for the future that really led through the divorce. So every decision that came up, we could say, okay, how does this impact that North Star, that vision of having her beautiful dog living close to one of her kids? How does every decision either get her closer to or get her further from that vision?
And another example that you gave, which I thought was very interesting, was the woman who wanted the big house because this is her house. This is where she's, lived for the past whatever, raised her family. Okay, so she gets the house, but she's got the mortgage. She has to take care of the house and the lawn and the pool and the whole thing. Didn't, that you have to think about those things. You get stuck in the moment and, wanting the house, but then a year later, maybe you don't want the house, or 2 years later, or 3 years later, right?
Yeah. And I'm not against people keeping the house but I do, like, you bring up a point that it's like people don't fully think through what the ramifications of that are. Several years, this is probably at least 5 years ago, one of the biggest surprises I had was a client who stayed in the house. She was able to afford all the upkeep and everything, but she said, Beth, he got to move out and start a new life. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize that by staying in this house, like there was that emotional side of it too that she hadn't. It's hard again, most people have never been through divorce before. Like and so it's hard to think about what that emotional side might look like. And I can just tell you that a lot of people are sometimes surprised that the reasons that they thought they wanted to be in the house aren't true once the divorce is over.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because I think you get stuck in this is what I have, this is what I want. And then you real just as you're saying, I don't want emotionally, don't want this anymore. And I need to move on, but you can't see it unless somebody like you points that out to them, to think about those kinds of things. And they're not always pointed out, right?
Mhm.
Um, the tax thing, I mean, that's can be very complicated. So, I mean, we don't have to go through all the tax issues, but there's some real, especially if you're, especially in when there are a lot of assets, right? High stakes divorce. Um, what would you say the most important, maybe the most important tax ramification of a divorce that maybe we could talk about or you could talk about?
Yeah, and I will keep it high level.
Yeah.
In the book, I think that was my goal. As I said, no one wants to sit down and if you're in the middle of a divorce, read through all this tax stuff and all this, but it is important. So we've tried to keep it very anecdotal and story based. So
Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to mention two things. Not two assets are not necessarily equal when it comes to taxes. So just because you're keeping, one person's keeping the $500,000 IRA and the other person is keeping the $500,000 other investment account, they are not necessarily equal from a tax perspective. And know that the day when assets are transferred after divorce, there is typically and rarely no taxes at that point. So, what I'm talking about is at some point you have to start taking money out of those assets. And that is when and so a lot of times people don't even know, right? They don't even know what they just know they got this asset and here's how much they're paying in taxes. They don't realize that if it had been split differently, that their tax situation could be a lot more favorable. And then the other thing, I'm going to stay high level again, but when we're talking about those regular investment accounts, sometimes called taxable accounts or brokerage accounts, it's not the IRAs, not the retirement accounts, but these other accounts, the default way that the financial companies divide these assets is going to typically give one ex-spouse a better tax situation than the other. And it's just very important to be aware of that. Even, in the ones that we're involved in, and we give the correct instructions to these financial institutions, they often mess up and we have to have them go back and do it again. And I mean, this is an extreme example, but we had a situation with a client where it was going to create an additional potential $300,000 of additional tax to her over her lifetime. So it's, have an accountants involved, have a certified divorce financial analyst involved. It's really important to there's these hidden tax things that can really make a big impact on someone's financial future.
Now let's get back to the emotional future, or the present, I guess, in terms of, let's say, a woman married to a man who's maintained his control over her during the marriage. We talk about the narcissistic spouse and how they can dictate things during this whole process. How does the woman handle that part of the process?
Yeah, and we could talk about this for a while. So I'll talk about the few things. I think one, so a lot of the divorces that we're involved in do tend to have some personality disorder situations going on. And so if someone is divorcing someone who is narcissistic, one of the things that we quite often see is that that spouse somewhat intentionally, maybe intentionally, I don't know, but for whatever reason, is often creating sort of this circus of the let me try to tell her this that will sort of scare her, or this that'll make her start to question herself, or this sort of like constant like fires that are being lit in different places. And so it can leave the woman in the situation that we're talking about in this example not like just constantly trying to run to put out fires when another one pops up. So I use a phrase quite often that says sometimes we have to just step away and water the plants. I love plants. And so there's a real power, I think, that comes in knowing when to react, when it is important to pay attention to the fire, and then knowing that actually there's this little fire over here that's actually not a big deal, and not to focus on that. Part of how we're able to help with that is by having an financial analysis during the divorce that we're very much, educating and making it very approachable for people, but where we can show, okay, he's trying to make a big deal out of this, but really where we need to be focusing on is this other place. This isn't the place to react. And the other thing that I find with this type of personality is to come out strong. This doesn't mean coming out being mean or overly aggressive, but so many women, especially who have been in these controlling relationships, just come in and they'll say, Beth, I just want it to be amicable. I want it to be easy. Let's just do what's fair. Like, I just want to keep the peace. And what I find is when women enter into divorce feeling sort of little like that, it actually can create the grounds for sometimes for a more contentious divorce going forward. Whereas coming out with a strong start in the beginning, if the wife to say, look, I've done my research. I know what's in our marital estate. I know what the tax ramifications are. I understand, like, coming out strong can feel foreign to a woman in that situation, but I've seen that it can also be what allows for the divorce process to not get so contentious.
And that brings in what you just, maybe I think it was in the beginning of the book, the dream team. You
Yeah.
need a dream team, right? We didn't go into detail about who the team is, but that's you. That's an attorney. That's a therapist, right?
That's correct.
And who else? There was one more member of this team.
Yeah. An accountant
An
sometimes,
accountant sometimes, yeah.
yeah. And then there's other experts. It depends on the divorce, but the key three that we, either the attorney or sometimes that's a mediator. Therapist, I would assume you would agree to, is
Yes.
absolutely critical.
Uh-huh.
And then, the attorneys, they're trained in the legal aspects of divorce. When they go through law school, they're not learning about deferred comp plans and restricted stock and all of that. And so that is one of those surprises I think that people have out there. And don't get me wrong, there are divorce attorneys who really understand finances inside and out, but that's not common. Most of them don't understand a lot of this tax ramification. So I think especially that three-player team of the attorney or the mediator, the certified divorce financial analyst, plus the therapist, I feel like is a pretty solid team that I think most people need during a divorce.
That leads us to, or brings us to, mediation versus litigation, and maybe kind of the woman who, like, or women who don't want to make a big fuss, I want to get it over with, mediate, don't litigate. But you say litigation, it's not as, there's a myth about litigation.
Mhm.
Perhaps it's not as terrible as you think.
Yeah, my eyes were opened wide open. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, where I had a client. I worked with them a little bit later in the process, but by the time they came to me, they had spent over $200,000 in mediation. And what some people don't know is that there's certain attorneys and they only want to handle things with mediation. So again, in mediation, the mediator, there's a third party, a mediator, and their job is to help the husband, assuming we're talking about a husband and wife here, come to an agreement, a settlement with their divorce. They're trying to help educate both sides, help make a decision. But the issue is that so mediation is great when both parties are willing to be reasonable. So when I see mediation fail is where there is one spouse who wants to punish the other, where when there is one spouse who sort of believes that they're above the law, that, I know the law says 50-50, or the law says I need to pay this much in alimony or maintenance, but I don't agree to that. And so what I find is I have seen situations, many situations where the couple was not set up to be able to come to an agreement that way. Whereas when people think of litigation, they think of trial. I have very, very, very few cases that go to trial. I mean, maybe one every other year. It's such a small number. But stepping into litigation means that a judge can be involved to say, look, they can force the other person to produce those financial documents. If the one spouse is just trying to delay, 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 a judge can start to hold them more accountable to a timeline. I don't want to say everything's perfect when there's a judge involved, but I'm just saying that so many people come in and they say, I want to do this collaborative divorce process, or I want to do mediation, when I hear them also saying, and I think my spouse has hidden money. He never let me even have the checkbook. He put me on a allowance of $1,000 a month or whatever it is. If there was this control dynamic earlier in the relationship, mediation may not be the right path.
Uh, okay, one last question because we have only a couple minutes left. But now looking forward, you've got a couple who's got kids, 3 kids, let's say, who are, in middle school, high school, whatever. What about college and all the stuff that's going to happen in the future? How do you negotiate that?
I think the main, so it in a good marital settlement agreement, or in some states it's called a divorce decree, it will stipulate who's going to, or how college is going to be paid for. Most states have pretty strict statutes about that. I think the biggest thing with college is, so our oldest son is a sophomore in high school, and and he's a very focused kid, and I still have no idea if he's going to end up at a school that's going to be 60 grand a year or 20 grand a year. I think the hardest thing around college is that you just do not know what that expense is going to look like until the kid is right there. And so I think the main thing is that it's just clearly spelled out in the agreement of who is going to cover what, for those college expenses.
Well, we only have a minute left, so tell us website, platforms to go to for more information about what we've been talking about, our conversation, because there's so much more. I mean, so much more in the book. Yeah, so give us some.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
can check out the book Stronger Than You Know on Amazon and purchase that there. And then our website is Purposeful Wealth Advisors. And we have an ongoing webinar, or you can find more information there.
Great. Thanks so much, Beth, for being on the show today. I certainly learned a lot, and I know the audience did too, but they need to read the whole book, obviously. Beth Krzyzewski, and yeah, we'll have to have you back on.
I appreciate it, Kathryn.
Thank
Thank you.
you.